The phone rang just as the wind picked up outside, rattling the bare branches against my window. I didn't check the screen. I knew that voice anywhere. Maribel, my only daughter. My reason for decades of sacrifice. "Mom," she began. Her tone clipped, rehearsed. "Don't come this Christmas. Rick says you interfere too much." And I agree, for a heartbeat. I thought I'd misheard. Interfere. The word lodged in my chest, sharp as glass. Memories crowded in late nights grading papers while she slept. The violin I paid for. The wedding I financed. Interfere. That was the thanks. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I smiled. Though no one could see, "I understand," I said softly. And then the line went dead. The house hummed with silence. I sat for a long moment in my armchair, staring at the faint reflection of my own face in the window pane. Outside, the neighbors' lights flickered with garlands and wreaths. My house stood dark. After a while, I rose and walked to the study. The cedar box was where it had always been, on the bottom shelf behind the worn novels. I lifted the lid, and the faint smell of Samuel's cologne still clung to the wood. Inside lay an old airline ticket stub and a folded letter, edges yellowed with time. His handwriting steady. Deliberate met me like an embrace. "If one day you feel you are only a shadow, take this ticket stub and go. Live for yourself. Nora, do not wait for permission. My love is your permission." I pressed the paper to my lips, my chest aching with the memory of him. He had seen it coming, this slow erasure of myself. I had tucked the letter away years ago, convincing myself it was only a keepsake. But tonight, after Maribel's call, it no longer felt like memory. It felt like instruction. I placed the letter back in the box and closed the lid. My smile remained, steadier now, less bitter. If my daughter thought I had no place at her table, then it was time to set my own. And so, the decision began to take shape. I didn't always live in silence. There were years when every moment was filled with Maribel's voice calling for me, needing me, pulling me forward. After Samuel died, she was barely 16, and the world suddenly rested on my shoulders, alone. I worked mornings at the public library, shelving books while my mind spun with unpaid bills. At night, I cleaned offices downtown, the smell of bleach in my hands as I counted the hours until dawn. Later, I opened the second-hand bookstore. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to keep her in private school. Tuition notices arrived like thunderclouds, but I signed the checks anyway. When she asked for violin lessons, I found the money. When her friends traveled to Europe after graduation, I took out a small loan so she could go too. My friends said I was reckless. "You give too much." They warned. I laughed it off, insisting. Mothers don't keep score. I believed it. Or maybe I needed to believe it, because keeping score would have revealed how uneven the ledger truly was. The wedding nearly broke me. Maribel wanted a cathedral service, chandeliers, an orchestra. Rick's family contributed little, so I covered the rest. $150,000, gone in one shimmering evening. As she walked down the aisle, radiant and certain, I told myself it was worth every penny. Christmas was the thread that stitched it all together. No matter how lean the year, I found a way to make it magical. Hot cocoa simmered on the stove. Midnight mass lit with candles. The same fragile star placed atop the tree since the year she was born. Even when she moved out, she still came back, and I clung to that tradition as proof we were unbreakable. Now, sitting in the hush of my empty house, I wonder if those years of sacrifice bound me to her, or simply bound me in place. What once felt like devotion is starting to feel like chains, and I can no longer tell the difference. The thought lingered as I reached for my phone and dialed Mr. Hale. That night I lit a small fire in the hearth, though the house no longer felt like home. The cedar box rested on my lap. Samuel's letter folded neatly inside. I traced the worn ticket stub with my fingertips, as though touching it could somehow summon his presence. His words echoed, "Live for yourself, Nora." The flames cracked softly, and for the first time in years, I admitted to myself that I wanted out, not just of Maribel's expectations, not just of the constant giving, but of the life I had been trapped in since Samuel's passing. I was 72 years old, and I had never once asked what it would mean to live only for me. I picked up the phone and scrolled to the number I had dialed 100 times in the past. Mr. Hale had been my lawyer for over 30 years, through mortgages, business contracts, and Samuel's estate. When he answered, his voice was steady, familiar. "Mr. Hale," I began, surprised at how calm I sounded. "I want to accelerate the sale." He hesitated. "Nora, are you sure? Once the documents are signed, there's no going back. That's the point," I replied, staring into the fire. He cleared his throat, his tone softening. "We can finalize within the week. The buyers for the bookstore are eager, and the house already has offers pending." "Good," I said. "Push it through." When the call ended, I sat in silence, listening to the fire burn down to embers. My decision was not a storm or an explosion. It was a quiet shift, like the tide pulling back from the shore. No announcements, no arguments, just release. I looked around the room, at the walls lined with books, at the star ornament still tucked in its box on the mantel. Soon, all of it would belong to someone else. And I felt lighter knowing it. By morning, I had made peace with my choice. The papers would be signed, and when they were, I would begin again. The first step was already waiting at the courthouse. Monday morning arrived crisp and gray, the kind of winter light that makes even familiar streets look foreign. I parked outside the county courthouse, the same brick building where I had once signed Maribel's birth certificate, where Samuel and I had finalized the mortgage on our first home. Now, I was here to sign it all away. Mr. Hale met me at the entrance, files neatly tucked under his arm. His eyes searched mine as if he wanted one more chance to confirm my resolve. But I nodded before he could speak. We walked together into the echoing hall. And in less than an hour, 30 years of my life were reduced to signatures and stamped pages. The bookstore went first. That cramped little haven of second-hand stories and worn leather chairs. I had poured myself into it, and now I released it without ceremony. Next came the listing for my house, its cedar siding soon to belong to someone else. Finally, the car-polished metal that had carried me faithfully, but never meant much compared to what it represented obligation. When the clerk slid the final document across the table, I paused. Half of what I received would not sit idle in a bank account. I had arranged for it to seed the Samuel Valine Foundation, a small trust dedicated to supporting single mothers left behind in old age. Women like me, who had given everything and been told it was too much. As I signed the line, I whispered, "I was always your provider, Samuel. Now I'll be their provider too." The ink dried, and something within me shifted. These weren't endings, they were openings. A door creaking wide after decades of being stuck. I gathered the papers, thanked Mr. Hale, and stepped back into the cold morning air. For the first time in years, I had no errands, no responsibilities, no one waiting on me. I only had the sound of my own breath and the sense that my life had finally become mine again. That night, I returned home to a house already beginning to feel like memory. By the time Christmas Eve arrived, the house already felt like it belonged to someone else. Boxes were stacked in corners, the walls bare where pictures once hung. Outside, Asheville glowed with lights, porches draped in garlands, children laughing as they trailed behind carolers. The sound carried faintly to my windows, but my house stood dark, I warmed a small pot of vegetable soup, the simplest meal I had made in years. No turkey, no pie cooling on the counter, no stockings hung. Just me at the kitchen table, my spoon clinking against the bowl. The silence wasn't heavy. It was honest. After dinner, I reached for Samuel's old copy of A Tale of Two Cities. The spine was cracked, the margins filled with his notes. I read by lamplight, hearing his voice in the scrawled comments, feeling his presence in the underlined sentences. Time blurred. And for once, I wasn't waiting for anything. No call, no knock, no invitation to be useful. When the clock chimed 11, I walked to the window with a single candle. For decades, I had lit one for Maribel, a quiet signal that her mother's home was always open. Tonight, I lit it for myself. The flame trembled, reflected in the glass, and I whispered, "I'm not missing out. I'm letting go." The words settled in me like a final blessing. I wasn't excluded from Christmas. I was choosing a different one. One without expectations, without the weight of proving my worth. The candle burned steady. A small but certain declaration that I was here, alive, and no longer bound. As midnight neared, the carolers' voices faded, replaced by the hush of snow beginning to fall. I watched the flakes drift against the dark street, my heart strangely light. It was then, in that quiet clarity, that I knew something had truly shifted. The phone would ring before long. The day after Christmas, the house was still. I rose early, made tea, and sat by the window watching the snow melt into slush on the street below. My phone buzzed on the table. One call, then another. By noon, there were 10. I didn't answer. By evening, the screen was stacked with missed calls. Each time it rang, I felt the vibration echo through the hollow spaces of the house. On the second day, the total reached 68. The voicemails came in a rush, one tumbling over the next. Maribel's voice cracked, sometimes angry, sometimes desperate. "Mom, I'm sorry. Please pick up." A pause. Then softer. "Mom, I can't sleep. Please don't shut me out. By the 50th. Her words were slurred with tears. "I don't know why I said what I did. I need you. Please." "Mom." I set the phone down on the counter and went about my day. The kettle whistled. The fire hissed. The candle burned lower. For once, my silence carried more weight than any answer I could give. I realized then how many years I had filled silence with explanations, with comfort, with promises. I had always rushed to close the gaps, to soothe her worries before she felt them too deeply. Now, she was the one standing in the hollow I had left behind, and she had no way to fill it. I walked past the phone each time it lit up, refusing to be summoned by guilt or panic. The calls piled higher, and with each one, I felt the chains of obligation loosen another link. On the evening of the second day, as the 68th call faded into voicemail, I turned off the ringer and let the house rest. My silence was steady, my decision unshaken. The next sound at my door would not come from a phone. The morning after I silenced the phone, I heard voices outside, from my front window, hidden behind the curtains. I saw Maribel standing on Mrs. Delaney's porch, her arms crossed tight against the cold. "Is my mom all right?" she demanded, her voice carrying across the street. Mrs. Delaney, sweet woman that she is, answered with a gentleness that cut sharper than scolding. "She's fine, dear. She sold the house, packed up her things, told me she was finally choosing herself." Maribel froze. I could see the shock stiffen her posture. Her lips parted, but no words came. For a moment she looked small, like the girl I once carried on my hip, lost in a crowd. Then she turned away, walking quickly down the sidewalk. Her phone clutched like a lifeline she no longer trusted. I let the curtain fall back into place. She had been told the truth, not that I was angry, Not that I was punishing her, but that I was making a choice she never imagined I was capable of. Later that day, I drove into downtown Asheville. The streets were crowded with holiday visitors, bundled in coats and scarves, hands wrapped around paper cups of cider. I slipped into a diner I'd never tried before and ordered a slice of pecan pie. Alone at the counter, I ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were proof that solitude could be sweet. No one knew me here. No one expected anything. I was just another face in the crowd. It was a strange kind of freedom, anonymity wrapped in powdered sugar. I found myself smiling as the waitress refilled my coffee. Not out of politeness, but because I meant it. For the first time in decades, I wasn't Maribel's mother, or Samuel's widow, or the woman who owned the bookstore. I was simply Nora that night. When I returned home to the quiet, I knew it wouldn't be long before Maribel came to me directly. It was just after dusk when I heard the pounding on my door. This time it wasn't tentative taps or unanswered phone calls. It was raw, insistent, and laced with sobs. I waited a moment, steadying my breath, then turned the lock and opened the door. Maribel stood there, her face streaked with tears, her coat unbuttoned against the cold. For a second, she just stared at me, as though confirming I was really there. Then the words tumbled out. "Why didn't you tell me? Why am I hearing it from others?" Her voice cracked, half fury, half grief. I kept my tone calm. "Because you said you didn't want me in your life. I respected that." Her mouth trembled, her eyes searching mine for softness she used to take for granted. "Mom." I stepped back and reached for the envelope I had left on the hall table. I pressed it into her hands. "Read it later, when the noise quiets down. But I'll tell you what it says for 25 years. I was only your provider. Now. I want to be Eleonora." She clutched the letter against her chest as if it were a shield. Tears fell harder. "I don't want to lose you." I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "Then learn to see me. Not just my wallet. Not just the one who fixes things. See me as a woman who deserves respect." For a long while, we stood in the doorway, neither speaking, the winter air rushing around us. Maribel finally nodded. A small, broken motion, as though agreeing with something she didn't yet know how to practice. I closed the door softly behind her when she left, the silence returning like an old friend. The suitcase I had packed earlier sat waiting by the bedroom wall, reminding me there was still one step left to take. January came with a bitter chill, but my resolve was warm and steady. At the airport gate, I watched snowflakes slide down the glass while my suitcase rested at my feet. When the boarding call sounded, I rose without hesitation. The flight to Porto was long, but I welcomed the stillness of the sky. As the plane descended, the Atlantic glimmered below, and I felt the first breath of freedom that belonged only to me. Within a week, I found a stone cottage in Paso de Regua, perched above the winding Douro River. The walls were cool, the floors uneven, and the windows opened to rows of vineyards stretching endlessly across the hills. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. My days settled into rhythms that felt both new and ancient. Morning coffee on the terrace, the air filled with the scent of soil and grapes. Afternoons wandering narrow cobbled streets where locals greeted me with warm smiles and called me Senora Eleanor. Evenings spent with a book, the candlelight soft against stone walls. I walked along the vineyards at dusk, the sky burning gold, and whispered to Samuel, "I am not an exile. I am a pilgrim to my own life." The words steadied me. For the first time in decades, I wasn't reacting to anyone else's needs. I was choosing. Letters from Maribel began arriving, forwarded through Mr. Hale. For once, there were no requests, only words, questions about my days, my dreams, my thoughts. I answered slowly, carefully, not as a mother rescuing a child, but as a woman sharing her life. One evening, as I sealed my reply, I realized something had shifted between us. The chain of obligation was gone, but something gentler had begun to take its place. The months slipped by gently, each day folded into the next like pages in a well-worn book. Then the first letter arrived. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable, Maribel's. I held it for a long moment before opening, bracing for the familiar tug of expectation. But inside, there were no requests, only questions. What do you eat there? What do you dream about these days? Do the vineyards smell like the ones we saw in California when I was little? I read the words twice, stunned by their simplicity. For the first time in years, she wasn't asking for money or advice. She was asking about me. I answered carefully, slowly, not with the urgency of a mother rushing to reassure, but with the patience of a woman sharing her own story. I told her about the cafe that served cinnamon rolls warm from the oven, about the fisherman who nodded to me each morning, about the way the Douro River glowed copper at dusk. The letters grew into a rhythm. Each week, one would arrive with new questions, and each week, I replied with honesty. She told me of her own struggles of loneliness in her marriage, of fears she'd never spoken aloud. I listened in ink, offering not solutions, but understanding. Then one evening, I unfolded her latest letter and read words that made me pause. Thank you for teaching me that love without respect is not love. I see you now. Mom. I sat by the window with a glass of red wine, the vineyards stretching beyond the glass. Samuel's letter folded on the table beside me. In my hand was Maribel's note, her words anchoring me in both past and future. Sometimes it takes 68 missed calls to finally answer the call within yourself.